Wow. Welcome, welcome. Zainab, what an honor. What an absolute honor to meet you and sit with you and chat with you today. Thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you for having me.
I am I am incredibly moved by you and I followed you for a while and listening to your story, which is an incredible story. I would love for you to sort of tell us a little bit about your childhood and who you are and what brought you here today, because you're an incredibly powerful and impactful human that hopefully I can potentially live up to, So please tell me how you got here.
Well, you're very kind. The story is long and complicated, obviously, but I'll summarize it with the fact that I am born and raised in Iraq. Um, and that there are three things that impacted my upbringing or the person that I am today, actually. One is war. I was 11 years old when the war with Iran started. And I was at a very young age, I was like, oh, the news is talking about war from as if it's only men in it, right? It's like the tanks and the soldiers and only men in war. But as a child, all the people in my life running the show were women, the teachers, the doctors, the policemen, and my mom, of course, everything. I mean, like I was just seeing all women, but the news was only showing men. So at a very young age, I was like, they're not seeing this backline discussion of the war, and women are missed out on, like they're cut off from the story. And that really stayed with me. And obviously it impacted, what I've done later in my life as a founder of Women for Women International. The second thing that impacted my life is fear. I grew up with a family that were chosen by Saddam Hussein to become his social friends. And I say chosen because it was most definitely not their choice. No one wants to be a friend of the dictator. And it was a paradigm where there's like to refuse the friendship is to be killed, or to risk other family members to be killed, and to accept it is to be imprisoned by fear. And we did, I mean, they accepted, and I grew up in fear. I grew up in a house that was bugged. um, my mom would tell me, I can see the prison bars exist, I just cannot prove them to anybody else, but that I am living inside the prison. And so it was not it was not a frivolous thing. I mean, everyone thought that we know the president, thus we must be happy. We were like having the material things that the knowing the president provides. But I grew up with my mom trying to kill herself, saying, I need to escape these prison bars, basically. And that really impacted me, as in the third issue, the third major component of my life is my own mother, who obviously suffered a lot in that relationship. And she would hold me as a teenager and did few things. One is made me read all kinds of women's rights books. I mean, I'm an Iraqi girl in Baghdad, Iraq. Yes, we traveled. My father was a commercial pilot, so we did travel around the world, but she made me read Roots as a teenager, about
Wow.
American history. She made me read all kinds of feminist books of all over the world, right? And in the Arab world. And she would tell me about how each woman pushes, goes through so much and pushes the other women to go and forward, basically. So we do not have to endure the violence that different generations have to endure. So I was like, wow, I'm wowed by my mom, who is no longer with us. But the second thing she said is that she said, you must always be strong. You must always be independent. Never let anybody touch you or talk to you in the wrong way. And she would say it, I'm saying it kindly right now. She would say it with passion. You must always be strong. And I was 16 years old. I was like, Mama, what have I done? Like, but she was like, you must always be strong and independent, and never allow anybody to abuse you. And that like was a tattoo in my DNA, basically. Because later on, a few years later, at the age of 19, my mother came to me and begged me to accept a marriage proposal in America. Um, and it's with a man that I did not know. And was a very open mother, a very liberal mother. She made sure that I should make all my choices in life, But here she is begging me and crying hysterically to accept an arranged marriage of a man I do not know. And I was like, she said, I don't care what you do, just leave. Once you arrive in America, I don't care what you do in America, but just please say yes and leave. And at the end of the day, I wanted to be a good daughter. I loved her. And I said, okay, I don't just stop crying, basically. And that's how I came to America in 1990 through an arranged marriage to a man I did not know anything about. And I had anxiety the minute I saw him. Long story short, within a month of my arrival here, Iraq invaded Kuwait. There were sanctions and embargoes on my country. I was stranded in here with no family and with what turned out to be an abusive husband who did everything my mom told me not to allow to any man to do. He abused me verbally and sexually, and he was an awful, awful man. And thankfully, right, she was like teaching me, do not allow anybody to violate you, So within 3 months of the marriage, and I did not even know the words rape. I just didn't, it was not in my vocabulary. My mom was a biology teacher, so she told me sex should always be enjoyable and beautiful and it's delicious. And I was like, okay, that's what sex is. And so when this sex was not good, it was not any of that. I was like, this is wrong. It does feel wrong. So with many stories of adventures, I left him with $400 in my pocket. And I vowed that I shall make something out of my life and I shall one day go back and try to help women around the world. And what I missed out is I was 16 years old when I turned one day to my mom and I said, Mama, when I grow up, I want to help women from around the world. Be strong. And she was driving and she looked at me and she's like, honey, you can. And that made all the difference that as a child, I knew that someone believed in me, right? And so when I left that arranged marriage, I was only at that time 20, 21 years old at that time. Within a couple of years only, I learned of a war in Bosnia, a country that I've never heard of. There were rape camps and concentration camps there. I had already remarried to a wonderful, wonderful man that I chose and loved. And I felt that all my life I lived in fear, right? And in fear means that you're not oblivious to injustice. You see the injustice. You're just afraid to say anything about it. And in my case, because I was afraid that my mom and my family rather would be killed, rather, we were this close to the dictator. And so being in America, and this is like something that never left me, right? A new immigrant in America. The thing about this country, there is a freedom of expression, right? To a great extent. And it was wow for me, like, wow, I can express myself and don't go to prison for it, or my family won't be killed for it. Like, it's just like, whoa. And so when I heard of injustice against other women happening in countries I do not know anything about, but that I was now living in a country where I had the freedom to act and the freedom to express myself, I honestly felt that it is my responsibility as a human being to do something about it. And it took me a long time to realize that if we avoid speaking or doing something about injustice that we are facing in front of us, especially when you're living in a country that allows you to express yourself, then we invariably legitimize it and mostly allow for the corruption of our own values. Because we each think that we're good people, we stand for these moral values and these moral values, but when we see injustice and do nothing about it and turn, that's our corruption, our values corruption. So I felt very, very strongly that I have to act now that I can. I had no money, no work experience, newly married, second marriage, in America, this place. I mean, I couldn't see my family for 9 years. It took me my mom's death to understand why she did this to me, why she asked me to leave. And I said, I'm going to do something about it. And all my friends laughed. They said, you don't know these people. Go get a good job, buy a house, get a car. And I just decided to follow my heart. And my husband, at the time, we're no longer married, but we are very good friends, supported me and said, I will be with you. And long story short, I started Women for Women International when I was 23 years old. I started with helping 30 women. I had no money, so the action was to ask every woman around the world to support one woman at a time by sending her $30 a month, along with a letter and a picture to create sisterhood between the two strange women, one from America and one from, let's say, a war conflict, a conflict area. But that we may not be equal in how much money we have, but we are equal in our stories. You know, that is a common, we each have common stories. So I did not want to say I am the helper and you are the victim. It's more like share your story. You know, the money is easy, but share your story. That's when that's when you're treating her equally. And Lord and behold, it started with 30 women in 1993. And as I speak with you now, we have helped nearly 500,000 women, raise $146 million, and connected another nearly 500,000 women from 68 countries to be all part of the solution. I no longer lead Women for Women. I resigned after 20 years of founding it and leading it. And I'm as proud of resigning as I am of founding it, because not many people let go of power, and I wanted to experience what that means. And there much more to my journey, but that's sort of the gist of it, that got me to where I am today.
Wow.
Wow.
What a story. I just
And also a roller coaster of emotions.
yeah, I told Brittany that
More after that, but but
yeah,
that's the summary of it,
the long story short, I think you really did pack a lot in there. First, I just want to say that I'm so humbled to be in your presence, because I was telling Brittany before we came on that your story, her story, not history, really, you were kind of the missing puzzle piece to my story here in America, growing up during that time in the 90s and seeing all of what happened and what transpired with our involvement with Iraq, and the way in which that propaganda was put on us. And to hear your story and your side of it really gave me so much more context, because as a little child at that time, I just didn't understand. There was a cognitive dissonance there where we were trying to be helpful but then cause more pain. And so first of all, I want to thank you for just your bravery in sharing your story and being so vulnerable, because it really helped me to open up my eyes to something that I wasn't privy to previously. But I did want to ask you, because you did realize why your mother made you come here and marry that man was to actually help you, because you being in such close proximity to um, Saddam Hussein. I can't believe I'm saying his name. And it's just so rare to meet somebody who knew him like in that way. Um, were there any spiritual practices or therapies or modalities to help you through the trauma and also your nervous system? Because you were at a level in your nervous system where you were just fight or flight all the time. And what do you practice now to help you with your life?
Well, it's a journey for me, right? And I started with my childhood. I grew up in a very secular household. A lot of people, thank you for acknowledging all the misinformation about Iraq that was spread in America. And many people do not believe that I grew up in a secular household in Iraq, right? So my parents were, where religion is practiced as a culture, but not as a dogma, right? And my grandmother, though, was a very spiritual woman and never imposed her traditions on us or her practices. She just like accepted us as we are. But she was spiritual, and that impacted me. But the story I want to tell is that my relationship with the divine, with God, I think was a very individual one, because growing up in this secular household that no one taught me about religion or anything like that. But my mother told me She said, never think that God is up there. God is everywhere. God is in the air. God in the trees. God is in the sands, which is like, whoa, God is in the ground, She said, see God. She said, see God everywhere. And that was literally all what I remember my mother telling me about spirituality or God or nothing. Like that is the only thing I remember, like stayed with me. And so as a child, I started teaching myself how to pray in the Muslim prayer. I grew up a Muslim. And there's something about the Muslim prayer that I love personally is the bowing and you put your forehead on the ground, because it's a very humbling expression. And I used to imagine myself this small, the size of an ant, like, a small ant, in front of God. This is my childhood imagine. And I was like, this is how insignificant I am in front of God. And there was love that is very personal that no one told me about it. It was just personal. But then when I came home to America, when I came to America and, it was not a good first few months, war in my country, a rapist guy, displacement, no money. It was horrible, First year I was like lonely, afraid. When I would tell people I'm from Iraq, they would just withdraw. They think I'm a terrorist, and I'm like, oh, I'm scared too, And so I was very angry at God. I was like, I felt betrayed by God, and I was like, and I just cut off myself from anything, just like I did not want to talk to God. I did not want to have that relationship, and I was angry. And something changed when 10 years later. And I get invited. So I now founding Women for Women, becoming a leader, all of that. And someone invites me to a leadership retreat in a native reservation, First Nations people in north of Ontario, Canada. And I'm thinking like, okay, I'm going to work on my leadership retreat. And one of the things they do in that leadership retreat is that they put you out in the land for a couple of days on your own. It's sort of a vision quest. You sort of fast, no food, no water, your sleeping bag, basically. And there are two things that happens in there. You're not supposed to have a pen, paper, nothing. You're alone in the land. And there was something magical about really being in presence to the land. And I remember laying down on the ground and putting my ears on the ground, basically, right? And I remember hearing Earth's heartbeat. And it was a profound experience for me. Like, it's like, the Earth has a heartbeat, and it reignited, let's say, my love for the divine and for God. And for me, as you know, as I expressed, I don't have a formation. I actually do not like dogmas. I feel religions and structures cut off our love, for the divine rather than enforce it. But I also don't want to be shy of calling it God, when God is everything for me, it doesn't matter, what God is. So it triggered something in me. That was a turning point in which there's something got open in me, but I was still rejecting the traditions and the religions of Islam. I thought of it as oppressive and all of that. So I decided to explore my spirituality in all methods. So I went to the community, the wise women in the community, the elder, and in the Anishinaabe community. And I said, can you teach me, can you, of your traditions, which she did. And I really immersed myself in the First Nation tradition of the Anishinaabe nation. I then met a Tibetan woman, and I wanted to learn as much as I can. And I started exploring different traditions, right? And finding the divine in all of them. I started working with different, from Tibet to Peru to Canada to all of that. And then a few years ago, I was invited to go and give a speech in Saudi Arabia, and Mecca, the house of God for Muslims, was only 1 hour away from me. And I was like, it's an hour away. Let me go and do it,
Mhm.
do the pilgrimage, And what I realized, and it's a long answer to your question, is what I realized, few things, is in all these explorations of different traditions and different ways of looking at, the divine, I found them all to say the same thing, personally,
Mhm.
and even with my religion, which I rejected, I was angry at it. When I went back after being taught from the First Nations and the Tibetans and the Peruvian shamans and all, I saw the same patterns of the same message, of the same rituals, it's just orchestrated in different way and then put it in dogmatic way. So we reject it, right?
Mhm.
So then, I was a long story short, but in all of these ways, the more I deepen my spiritual practices, first of all, it was very private for me. I never shared it in public. I was sort of, my activism persona was in public, but my spiritual persona was very private. I was embarrassed to share it. I thought that I will be seen less of a feminist or an activist, for the longest time. That was also my private space. But what it led me to, um, creating my own practices, I now have what I call an appointment with my heart every day. So I don't call it meditation, I call it an appointment with my heart,
Mhm.
because it's sort of a private space that I have with my heart, and that is the foundation of the ground I walk in, basically. Just before I came here, I did my appointment, and if I miss it, then I'm missing Europe. Like, it's an appointment, right? It's like, and
Mhm.
I sometimes I miss it, and I was like, I apologize, to it.
Mhm.
Second, I make sure that nature is very part of my own spiritual practice. It's I need it, I love it. A few years ago, I almost died, and I felt nature was my cheerleaders to help me survive, and to help me gain my health. So I am loyal to nature and to earth. I owe it my life. So that is, walking in nature is part of my spiritual practices as well. And then I belong to a community where every few months, every 3 months particularly, we get together and we sit down and we meditate together, and we do our rituals together, and we basically allow the space where we are expressing ourselves, our sorrows or our joys, or our dance, and what doesn't matter. Like, we're expressing ourselves in the safety of a community where we're holding our safe spaces for each other as we talk and process what's going on in our lives. And I came to a state where, like, you succeed from your head. For the longest time, I'm part of this a new platform called Find Center, where my friend, the founder of it, he says for the longest time he was succeeding, and I associate with it from just, expressing yourself in your heart, in your head, intellectually, and then we sort of don't allow, we either cut off ourselves from our heart, or that space becomes private, and we don't talk about it. And now I feel, heck, we cannot go about the future in our personal lives or as a collective without leading with our hearts. And for us to lead with our hearts, we need to have the appointments with our hearts. And we need to prioritize our spiritual health, if you may, spiritual nutrition, spiritual, as a way of being, because this living life out of datas and statistics and, hey, what you've accomplished and all of that does not work anymore. It is not the full truth about who we are. It is not the full truth about who I am. And the full truth is, I am someone who is in love with the divine, in love with the divine. And that's what keeps me going. And now that priority, that connection is the foundation of the ground in which I walk in every single day. And I no longer am willing to be shy about it or to keep it as a private space. I'm actually saying, this is who I am. I am the activist. I am the writer. I am the spiritualist. I am the woman. I am the sexual. I am the beautiful. I'm the all of it. And I'm the ugly. as well. I'm all of it. And I am no longer going to give you only part of me and hide the other part of me.
The whole being.
Mhm.
We're leading with the whole being. When you were saying that, sometimes we lead from our hearts, and we sort of really focus on that, or we lead from our heads and we focus on that. And what we really are missing is that wholeness, because we separate it. And it's very Western to like cut off pieces and like, oh, take your foot hurts, let's focus on the foot. But it's the whole being. And when we um, quiet or ignore any part of ourselves, right? It echoes into how we deal with the rest of the world, with life, connection to nature, because we forget about wholeness. Something else you said that really stuck with me and struck me both, and being someone who is so in love with the divine and understanding that those two are not separate, they're parts of a whole. And Laura and I always talk about this, how we see that those who exist in the neo wellness spiritual communities really focus on ignoring the ugly and ignoring the pain, or ignoring what is, in an effort and a desire to skip ahead. How did you reconcile that those two are part of the same?
Well, first, it drives me crazy when people ignore the ugly and they just want to go into it's all love, it's all love. And I'm like, I worked in conflicts. I come from an area that is destroyed. My country is destroyed to a great extent due to America. I just was part of evacuating Afghan women, and that's countries. It's just, I've seen a lot of destruction of lives and of countries in my eyes, and I'm not willing to say to ignore it. I can't. And I honestly came to it. My last book, Freedom is an Inside Job, was all about how do we own our shadow and our light to change our lives and change the world, right? And I came out of it, that realization, through humility, to be honest, because I realized there is an sort of an arrogance to the fierceness of the activist, right? We know what we want. I'll own my own arrogance and that, right? It's like, I know what we want. This is right. This is wrong. And there's like, just you go fiercely at it. And every time I would go to a part of the world or got an encounter where I am like this activist who is, saying this and this and this and giving a lecture for the bad guys, there are times, many times, in which they pointed the fingers at me, and they're like, well, how about you? And there are many, 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 many stories, and I'll share with you one or two. But in all of these stories, and what led me to realize, wow, I believe in such and such value, let's say, but I am looking at this value and screaming it from the broadness of my chest. And then when it was returned, when the finger was pointed at me, like, are you really living these? And I really looked at the value itself and really assessed, am I truly living this value, as opposed to being fierce about advocating for it? I realized it's hard. Like, no, I'm not living it 100%. And that to live it 100%, which I truly try, it is very hard to live our values 100%. And yet we have to try, in my opinion. I have to try. It's important. But that in the awareness of that, it makes me humble as I advocate for it in the world. And I became more compassionate to the other side, and as in, oh, I understand how hard this is to implement this value. So as I advocate for it, it became, I call it, from the length of my spine, rather than broadness of my chest, the shouting. It's much more saying, I know this is hard, and I still ask you to do that. And I'll give you two examples, and one is simple and one is more complex. And the simple one is really, climate change and earth and all of that, right? Well, there's a lot of behavior change that we need in climate change. It's not about we need policy change and putting it all on the government and corporation, which they hold a major part of it, right? But us as a consumer and as a citizen also need to change our own private personal behavior, right? Because if we all make that change, also they will adjust for us, basically. So, and that change is truly, we need to be disciplined, for example, and this is my values, right? I was like, I just co-founded a group called Daughters for Earth, which is to mobilize women for climate change. Well, one of the industries that create a huge waste is the fashion industry. Just to give you a frivolous example, right? Huge waste of water. And when I go to a store and you get excited and I love fashion, and I'm like, the discipline to stop myself as I see something I like and to say, what were your practices? Did you pay the people right? Not minimum wages, livable wages. What were your environmental practices? What were your, farming practices? That question, that puts all the energy for me not to buy the shirt that I really like. And this is a very simple question that we all go through, right? And then just say, nope, I'm not going to spend my money on this. I am really wanting only ethical design, but that's a discipline. When I'm trying to, it's a very simple example, but that discipline is not always easy. I'm giving a short example, but it's not always easy because we have to have that will and the power of saying, no, But I tell you a more complex example. I was doing a story after I left Women for Women. I started my career in journalism and did a lot of shows on understanding the war from a woman's perspective. And one of the episodes I've done is a story of trafficking against women in India. And so I go to this brothel owner and I convince him to speak to me. And he's like, speaking about, and he was willing to, he opened up. It's like, okay, this is how much I buy the women. This is how much they have to work for 5 years for free to pay off their debt, but me buying them. It's horrible, horrible, horrible. And at one point I'm listening to him and I don't have a poker face. So I'm like, and he looks at me and he says, you belong to a class of women who judge us. You make fun, who judge our behavior, but you do not understand you are part of it. And I'm like, I'm a feminist, women's rights activist. How am I part of your, enslavement? And he said, you don't, he wasn't talking about me, but what I represent. He said, you do not ask your brothers and fathers and sons and male friends if they ever paid for sex, because they are the clients we support. If there is no customers, we don't exist. And you do not challenge the women in your own communities, and this was in India, that do not pay women who are working for them as maids or as like manual laborers, and your own abuse of these women. Who do you think takes advantage of the abuse you create? I do. And I was taken back because I really, no, he's a horrible man, right? And no, I'm not part of it. But then I went back and I asked every man I could speak with in my life, have they ever paid for sex? And this is not a moral discussion about sex workers versus prostituted women. This is much more about where men are part of it, because there's a lot of abuse in that process, no matter what's labeled. When men pay for sex, they feel they can do whatever they want to do with it, so there's an abuse no matter what. But that's a different discussion. Anyway, I realized 70% of the men I asked said yes. 70. So that brothel owner was like pointing the finger at the shadow of the existence of where I come from, right? And here I am lecturing him from an entitlement, from a self-righteous perspective. But when I asked, and I was shocked because these are conversations I needed to have with men that I know, right? Like, you're doing this? Do you realize how old were they, these women? Did we like, how, you know, what their practices, you know, to make sure that she is safe and she is okay. And so that doesn't justify the brothel owner's horrible enslavement, basically, of these women. But by me knowing that yes, you know, like I want to go back to him and say, yes, I know, sir. And it still does not legitimize your abuse. You see what I mean? I know I'm doing this conversation. I am aware, and I am working on these as well. And it's still, you are still an abuser. Because when I come from a self-entitlement stage and as if I am like all perfect, right? Then that's when the shadow, they catch our shadow, you know, and that's when we need to own our shadow and our light. For me, not only to be whole in ourselves, not only so when the shadow part of us comes and jump like a, you know, because, you know, we all have shadow, right? You know, like impatience, anger, whatever it is, anxiety,
Yep.
we all have shadow, but we don't want to talk about it. So for me, it's important for each one of us to own that shadow, because when it comes and you're like, oh, here it comes, as opposed to dumping it under the rug and refusing its existence. And then this is still controlling you. So that's one thing. But we also need to own our shadow as we advocate for the other, for rights, because then those who see it, because everyone is seeing it through, by the way, outside of us. So then we say, oh yeah, I see my shadow. It still does not legitimize Mr. Trump or whoever it is, you know, to do this and this, or to say this and this. It still does not do that. That ownership of our wholeness is important for us to go on in the world in a new way, in a more full way.
Wow.
Wow.
And clearly, America has, as a whole, a gigantic shadow that we need to face collectively and within ourselves, because we are colonizers. Our, you know, the country that we currently live in, at being American as well. And I was listening to your TED talk, and you said very, very visceral accounts of women around the world who are affected by war, and some of them affected by the United States. But you said it so elegantly, and I'm just really curious, and I'm going to try not to project onto you, but just observing Americans being so fragile, and we can't even say the word white privilege without white-bodied folks being like, "Oh my God," or history not even being taught correctly in schools and the education system, and the way in which media portrays our role in the world. How do you have conversations with people who actually need to do this work, who have the power and the privilege?
Very good question. And I learned it honestly the hard way, right? Because as a woman of color, and an immigrant, and a Muslim, you get like all the bads, you know, like in different states of my life. And I used to snap, you know, like when someone says something racist to me or horrible. I mean, it's an insult to the soul. It hurts the soul, you know. And I would just be angry and just like. And then at one point, I realized, honestly, the realization did not happen with the absolute other. It happened with my friend's new wife, you know, who I love this friend. I adore him, all of that. And so it was sort of close, right? And we're having dinner, and she says something horrible about, like, you know, we were talking about religion, and she says, oh, we don't, you know, whatever. Her views were very conservative, and then I switched the subject to, you know, whatever. My best friend had just married her wife, and she's like, she was, oh, all LGBTQ are gonna go to hell, and I was like, oh my God. And then I like, okay, let's just a subject to like animal rights, and she says, no, it was horrible, like, you know, your nightmare come to dinner, basically, and he is my right. And so then I was like, went to my traditional thing, which is like, just be sharp and angry and, you know, like rude. I mean, whatever. I'm offended by her views. So I just like also responded in an offensive ways, I guess, you know. Not, I guess, I know I was upset and I showed it. And what led afterwards, to be honest, and this was the wake up call for me, is I lost his friendship. And he was so, so, so dear, like my baby brother, basically. And I lost his friendship, and it broke my heart that I lost love. Basically, I lost love, right? And it really made me reflect on, okay, well, I still disagree with her, like complete. I mean, she is the other that I, yeah. And yet I love him, and I don't want to lose love, because that love is important. So, and then I start reflecting on my own attitude. And then obviously I face a lot of discrimination since I arrived to America, and sexism and all of it. But you just sort of, when it's a stranger, you brush it, you attack, and you don't care if you attack them, and you move on. But this was close. And I really spent a year working hard on it, I believe that when things happen to us, when bad things happen to us, we have two choices: either avoid it or go through it in the eye, look at it in the eye, look at darkness in the eyes. And that has been my methodology always, is to always look at darkness in the eyes, your darkness, others' darkness, it doesn't matter. But when you do that, you at least learn from it, you process it, and you will come out of it the other side. I have no doubt. Like, this has been my journey in life, and that work becomes a book in my library. Oh, that's sadness. Oh, that's a loss of love. And it helps me connect with others in a different way in the future. So when I reflected on it, I was like, what did I accomplish? She did say things offensive, to my soul. But I also, when I responded to her in this attack, I closed off the discussion. There was no incentive for her to be part of the discussion, right? And then I started looking even deeper. It's like, what do people do when they do things like that? Where are they coming from? Well, they're coming from fear, fear or insecurities. So, because when I betray, the things that for me, when I betray myself, it comes from my insecurities. Well, I'm not sure if they're betraying themselves, but they're fear, So then I processed and I decided I'm going to engage differently next time this happens. Let me try. And lo and behold, there was a woman who I was having dinner in a group, and she was seated in front of me, and sort of the replica of the conversation, right? I was like, and this time I just like, so you're afraid, I mean, it was about Muslims, and it was all Muslims are going to come and invade us and change our constitution and And I said, so you're afraid? And she says, yes, I'm afraid. You're afraid of immigrants? Yes, I'm afraid that they're going to do that. So what happened first is I acknowledged her fear. It doesn't mean I agree with her fear, but I try to acknowledge her fear. Like, I see your fear. And when I did that, she calmed down. Like, she was not defensive and attacking back and closed off the walls, right? So she calmed down. And then I started telling her what it feels to me to be a Muslim in America, and what is the religion for me, and what does it feel to me to hear her opinion, or people like that. And it's, but I said it from a tone of love, because my goal was to engage in creating a change and a difference, basically. Because I want, in other words, when I lowered my wall and showed my vulnerability and how my true feelings are, I then enabled her, gave her the permission to lower her wall and talk about her own fears and worries. But when both walls were lowered down, we both were able to engage in a different way, right? Mm-hmm. And at the end of the conversation, she thanked me. And she said, I really appreciate you not attacking me. And I really learned a lot from you. And you opened my eyes in a different way that I never knew, that the story you're telling me. And I did not stay in touch, but I followed her news to see if she has changed, and she had. Mm-hmm. Now, when we do this, not always the other side change, but it is worth giving it a shot, right? We do this for ourselves, because when I shout react, it's also the shadow of me, to be honest. And I don't like that aspect of me that I'm snapping at the other. It brings not, I know it's in defense. I know it is to protect myself. I know it's because I'm hurt, but I don't like that, jarring parts that label the other immediately and shut them down. So I did it for me first, to stay in truth into my own consciousness. Um, but it also enabled another bridge. It created a bridge. And I think it was worth it, basically. And I went back to my friend, and by the way, owned my, excuse my language, but I owned my shit in that part. Not my values, but my reactions.
Yeah.
Okay. Because my values, I still there. I will fight for these values, right? But my reaction to her, and he came back and apologized himself. And she came back and apologized as a result. And now we're back as good friends. So they are ways of engaging in a way that is inviting the engagement. And when we invite the engagement, not everyone is going to respond, but enough people are going to respond. And I think that is worth trying, basically. And one of the things that I really decided in the process is I stopped label, like when I hear a racist remark, I used to say, you are racist. I stopped that. I stopped in that because I realized the minute I label someone a racist, they shut down. They are racist but I need to engage, and that engagement allows different conversation where they're not defensive, and that it allows me to engage in a different way. Sometimes it succeeds and you move forward. Sometimes it fails and you move forward, and you're like, okay, okay, that I gave you a chance and I'm moving forward in here, but I'm staying in consistency with my values and as Rev Angel Kyoto Williams says, I am staying in belonging to myself, that everything I say tastes good in my mouth, basically. Every behavior I say is about me staying true to myself, because when I don't, like I snap, it doesn't taste good for me. So I am going to stay in that consistency. You have a choice of joining me or not.
Wow, I need to practice that. Like for sure. My initial reaction is always snapping as well because it comes from a deep-seated hurt. And also, there's so many resources out there now, and there's so much talk now, and I feel like we're having these conversations on a daily basis now about race and privilege and power um, and again, I think Americans are incredibly privileged and entitled and selfish, and there's an unconsciousness there where many Americans don't even realize what it means to be in a country where we have so much privilege and we don't have to live in a war torn country, and we're so far removed from war that I think the more privilege we have, it almost makes us, and I include myself in this obviously, it makes us emotionally detached from people around the world who are going through these things, which is such a sad part of all of this. But again, I watched your TED Talk, and basically the message that I got from that is women just have to start ruling the world.
Well, I want to say two things about that. I mean, about America, because my wish for America, and it's a country that honestly, it gave me refuge, right? I mean, it gave my family refuge also, and it also destroyed my country. And my wish, my prayers for America is to have its own Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It really does have to. And it's not only about the history of this country, from what's done to Native American, to the African Americans, to all immigrants communities, Chinese Americans, but it also includes the most recent policies of engaging in a war and engaging with the lens and leadership of war with other parts of the world, and really leading to destruction of them. And I mean, this country cannot grow if it does not have its own Truth and Reconciliation. So we at least are in the same page of the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
So because it's like part of the schism is that we're not on the same narrative, for God's sake. So we need just to be on that narrative for the country's healing, for the country to go forward in a new way. But in terms of women in my TED Talk, I do, it's not women, but I do believe that this century needs to be the feminine century, or else we are in trouble as humanity. And feminine is in every man and in every woman, or rather in every woman and every man. And women have an upper hand, in my opinion, of tapping into our feminine values and learning them more and leading with them. Because the truth is, we are here, women, women's rights advocates, conscious women, feminist women, all of that. But we also live in a patriarchal world and in a masculine values world. And I had to be very conscious. I still have to be very conscious of the part of myself that leads with masculine ways, right? Yeah. Because we are part of a system in here and come as part of our education. And I feel like, we need to tap into these feminine values, which they have been reduced to us. They've been told, oh, feminine values is to be nice and to be beautiful, but to really tap into their strength and their power and their depth and lead with them with discipline and perseverance and love, and show the man how to lead with them as well, because they not always. We need to demonstrate that, right? We need to demonstrate how do we lead with these feminine values so we can bring everyone around, so we can turn this century into the feminine century. Because I tell you, our earth is in trouble. And these masculine, like the patriarchal way of leading is creating and deepening that trouble. So we need to change, and we women have an upper hand at leading that change, but it needs to be not in reaction. It needs to be out of the coreness of our values, of the length of our spine, not in reaction to all the bad things. And thus Che Guevara said, revolutionary leaders overcome oppressive leaders only to become the oppressive leaders themselves. So my biggest is that we are, reacting against patriarchy and reacting against the oppression. But when we only are fighting against, as opposed to fighting pro, then we are entrapped by the same entrapment. Then we become patriarchal in our journey of change. And what I'm asking for is that we fight against, but we demonstrate what is, what can be, right? And that is tapping into our feminine values. And we need to lead with, and love for me is not, as we started our conversation, love is fierce. Love is justice. Love is truth. Love is, living in alignment. Love is not only disconnected from our shadow. Love is seeing both of it and loving it all, right? And so we need to demonstrate that. And and this is what we're, that I really believe that. And that's everything I'm doing right now, whether it is my podcast Redefined, or whether it is Find Center, the platform where I call it the search engine for the soul, that brings all these wisdom of all time together. That is, everything I'm doing now is how can I contribute to connecting, to helping people connect to their hearts, to each other, and to the divine in a new way. And I want to say one last thing, because so much of spirituality and spiritual teachings have been led by either men, wonderful men, or by women in here in America, that like these are premier women in America, which are also wonderful people. What I'm interested in, as someone who comes from different traditions and different religion and different background, I wanted to always say, are you telling me that my people have no spiritual wisdom? Because the one we know is only from, so I don't want to name names because I actually respect them, right? Like there's nothing wrong with the people that are the leaders, but it's like, are you telling me that this is it? Like I don't come, and this is for me what's led to, part of the reason that led to the founding of Find Center is act like, let's unbury all this wisdom that is coming from different traditions and cultures and backgrounds, and there was spirituality in all of it, and women. Do you know how many wise women, prophetess women, I believe, who were buried, who were like, their wisdom and their voices were completely erased, and all what we hear is the man. I just discovered an 8th century Sufi woman from my own home country, Iraq, was the first Sufi that is known, and she was enslaved. And her slave owner saw her praying and was so touched by her love for God that he's like released her. He was so humbled by her love for God that he released her, and she became this pioneer teacher in Arabia in the 8th century. I mean, and you look at me like right now, Muslims, or Muslim women are your oppressed. And, I was like, no, we came from that tradition. It was buried and not known. And only now we're unraveling that wisdom and saying, tap into it, find it, lead it, man. I mean, women, and make this time our time, but we need to connect it with our hearts and our minds.
Imagine where we would be if we could just dig it all up and share it all, imagine where the world would be.
We can. I mean, I believe that it is possible to make the impossible possible. I really believe in making the impossible. Every journey in my life, right? When I founded Women for Women, I was told it's impossible. You don't have money, you don't have work experience, spare your time. Well, it happened. When I went and sat in my journalist career and built one of the biggest shows in the urban Muslim world, and impossible. No, you cannot. Well, it happened. And recently, I think I told you I had a near-death experience a couple of years ago, and sort of that really woke me up to the most important things about life, which is because it's in that intimate moment between life and death, right? In that very intimate space with oneself and one's heart. The question in that moment is not, did I accomplish enough? It's not, do I have enough? It is, did I live my life in kindness to myself and to the world? Did I live my life in love to myself and to the world? And that's the question, and when I emerged out of it and I said, I want to do this podcast that, talk about personal journeys, our inner journeys, sort of what we're talking right now. And I want to be part of Find Center, which is like to make all wisdom of all time accessible. Everyone's like, impossible. Go get yourself a job. I believe in making the impossible possible. If we don't dream and go for it and make this century our century and realign our lives to live it out of our own values, then I think the DNA of humans is to dream and to make change happen. Otherwise, we would not. In this case, our own existence is at stake at the moment.
Wow.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a beautiful place to end this conversation. Zainab, I feel like you've lived multiple lifetimes.
Some people say, I don't know, but some people like a cat's life,
9 lives. So much wisdom. Thank you so much. We're going to link everything in the show notes, all that you do.
Everything.
Thank you so much for your whole entire conversation was just a message for the world. So thank you so much.
Oh, I have to say, what an honor and a privilege to be in conversation with you both. I feel like soul sisters, and being able to have these conversations from a knowing, of not only the soul, but also of the world's reality. And I really appreciate that knowing and that sharing with me, and allowing the space to have this honest conversation and courageous conversation, as you said. Thank you so much for your visions and for who you are. You give me hope. You keep me going.
Thank you.